All right, so this week the headline was New Housing Crisis. January home sales dropped by 8.4%. That was the biggest monthly drop in 4 years. And NAR's chief economist went out there and basically said that Americans are stuck. The market isn't moving. Something is broken. And look, I get why that gets attention. The numbers are bad. They really are. But here's the thing. There's a difference between a crisis and a problem that's been building for over 3 years and is just now starting to show up in the monthly data. And this week, I want to walk you through what's actually going on, what's actually new, and what any of this actually means if you're running your business right now. All right, real quick, before we get into it, yes, this is what I look like when nobody's watching. Hat on, coffee, hoodie, definitely not anywhere close to business casual this morning, but Sundays are when I do my actual thinking. I go through this week's data and I figure out what matters versus what's just noise. And I try to understand what the market is actually telling us versus what the headlines want us to believe. I've been doing this for myself every week for a long time, so I started recording it because people kept asking me what I'm paying attention to. So that's what this is: unfiltered, underdressed, and hopefully useful. All right, so let's get into the big number. January existing home sales came in at 3.9 million annualized. That's the slowest pace since late 2023, and we're down 8.4% from December alone. But here's what everybody is skipping. Closings reflect contracts that were signed 6 to 8 weeks earlier. We're measuring what buyers were doing in November and December when rates were higher, confidence was already falling, and the market was in its seasonal slowdown that we see every single year. Guys, this is not a new collapse. This is simply a delayed readout of a market that we already knew was struggling. Here's what is new. For the first time in decades, new homes are cheaper than resale homes on average. Last time I saw this breakdown was in 2008. Builders are cutting prices, offering rate buydowns, running aggressive promotions, and nearly 20% of all new homes built in Q4 were discounted. Lennar cut average sale prices by 10% year over year. Why? It's because they're sitting on inventory and they need to move it. It's pretty basic math, right? At the same time, and guys, this matters, tariffs that hit January 1st are adding real cost to our transactions. Kitchen cabinets at 30%, vanities 50%. The National Association of Home Builders estimates roughly $10,900 in added construction costs per new home just from the current tariff stack alone. So builders are cutting prices and absorbing new tariff costs simultaneously. Guys, that math won't hold forever. Here's a couple other data points to pay attention to. Inflation actually did improve. The PCE dropped to 2.4%, and we're getting really, really close to the Fed's target of 2%. Mortgage rates barely moved at all. Freddie Mac put the 30-year average at 6.09% as of this Thursday, and consumer confidence, it is genuinely bad. More than half of the people planning to buy or sell this year expect a recession. More than half, guys. But 86% still say that it is a good year to transact. What that tells me is the intent is still there to move units, but the confidence, it's not quite there. And that, my friends, is the tension. All right, so here's what all this actually means to me, anyways. The noise this week is coming from the way this crisis is being framed. The signal, in my opinion, though, is that it's the new build to resale price inversion. Think about what it means that new homes are currently cheaper than resale. That's a window, guys. Buyers who are qualified and need to move can literally walk into a new construction community and find better pricing than they could in the resale market. And that almost never happens. And that window, though, is probably closing because builders can't keep absorbing this almost 11,000 new material costs forever. At some point, those costs are going to have to get passed on to the buyers or the discount disappears. If you're working with the buyers who have been on the sidelines, this is a real conversation you need to be having right now. Now let's talk about this confidence piece. Deals are stalling not because of the rate math. That's some old language you need to get rid of. Rates are at 3-year lows. They're stalling because the economic headlines are scaring the hell out of people. More than half the buyers out there expect a recession this year. You can't counter that with, but rates are at 6%, right? That's not what they're worried about. What buyers are actually scared about is their job, their savings, their stability. And when you're looking at a $400,000 commitment while 55% of Americans expect the economy to get worse, you hesitate. You naturally hesitate. Even if the math works, this is a confidence problem. This is no longer an affordability conversation. Those require two completely different approaches from the agents. All right, here's what I think we should be thinking differently about. The agents that are building resilient businesses right now aren't the ones with the most leads. They're the ones that are the most fluent. And what I mean by that is they are fluent in data. They are fluent enough to sit across from a scared buyer and help them see the difference between economic noise and their actual situation. That's a real skill and it's genuinely hard to develop. It requires doing this work every single day, being in the trenches every single day, not simply skimming headlines on Facebook, but truly understanding what these numbers actually mean. On the buyer side, if you're not already building relationships with new home sales reps in your market, now is the time. You need to know which communities are doing buy downs. You need to know what the real discounts look like and when those incentives are likely to shift. That's an edge right now that most agents aren't using for some reason. On the seller side, nationally, days on market hit 64 days this week. Guys, that is the longest in 6 years. Sellers are literally outnumbering buyers by a record gap right now. The data clearly supports hard pricing conversations up front on day one. The agents that are willing to have those conversations early will hold their listing inventory, while agents telling sellers what they want to hear are likely going to spend the next 3 months chasing price reductions. All right, so the bottom line for this week is the new housing crisis headline is real in the sense that entry-level buyers are genuinely locked out of this market in many cases. That matters, and it's not getting solved anytime soon. But for the mid to upper market buyers, this is a confidence problem, not an affordability issue. And confidence, guys, is something agents can actually solve. There is a window in new construction pricing. There is a clarity problem among sellers that the data says we need to fix now. None of this requires the market to change. It requires agents to show up with the information and the skill to work it as it actually exists. Guys, I do this every single week because I'm working inside this industry with you side by side. I'm not watching from the sidelines. I'm the VP of Growth for Energy Realty, and I pull this data for myself every single week, so I figured I'd share it. If this lines up with how you're thinking about your business, let's talk. Drop me a comment, reach out. I'm always down for a quality conversation. I'm Charles Boyette, and I'll see you next week.